Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick.
And I'm Alistair.
And this fortnight, it's two big follow-ups, as we look at Gladiator II, the sequel to a movie from 20 years ago, and The Diplomat Season 2, the follow-up to the successful Netflix political drama from just last year. But before we get to all those big number twos, Alistair, what else have you done?
So I've got something a bit different to discuss this week, which is, I wanted to talk about the new album from Linkin Park, which is From Zero. So this is, different to what we haven't talked about an album in a while. Yeah, a bit of context for this, in that I haven't really listened to Linkin Park for 20 years or more, although Hybrid Theory was the first album that I bought, and Meteora, the second album, still slaps, I must say. But a few years ago, sadly, Chester Bennington died, and they've obviously been searching for a replacement. And what caught my attention was that, they chose Emily Armstrong, singer from a band that I quite like called Dead Sarah. They're a band I got into during lockdown. They're a sort of, raucous, sort of punk metal hybrid act, with great songs and real great charisma. So that led me to listen to this new album, for the first time listening to some Linkin Park in a long time. And overall it's good. I mean, it's significant because of the change in direction they've gone to have a woman singer now. I did kind of like the new sound they've got and things like that. Probably not my favourite album of the year, but I do, kind of like the direction they've gone in. The sound has certainly matured. It seems sort of a bit less of the 2000s era new metal, people rapping over metal riffs and things like that. And it seems to kind of come together a bit more as a whole. So if you're curious about how this has worked out, then I would recommend checking this album out because it's quite good.
I have never listened to a Linkin Park album, I don't think. I just know a few of the singles. So you say they've moved away from rapping. Is this officially no longer rap metal? Is the new vocalist singing rather than rapping?
Well, there's still some rapping going on. It just seems to blend together better. There's definitely some sort of more rap bits. Back in the day, Linkin Park had two vocalists. They had Chester Bennington was the singer, and Mike Shindogu, I think that's how it's pronounced, apologies. He was the sort of the MC who rapped. He did also samples and keyboards as well. Obviously, he's still very much in the band. So you still got Mike Shindogu MCing and stuff. And then, there are some sort of more, rap-oriented songs. I think it sounds quite different to, what you call rap metal. We are a longer way from, something that sounds like Rage Against the Machine or Limp Bizkit, in that, there's more emphasis on kind of the sung vocals. I mean, the distinctive Linkin Park sound was always, one voice singing and sort of doing the metal screaming, and, one voice rapping. I feel there's more of an emphasis on the singing now. That might be a fact that they've got a new singer. They kind of want to showcase her skills and how she's evolved the band's sound. So maybe she's got a bit more space on the album than they might have in the future. I've seen quite a few of their tracks on YouTube. They do now with the new lineup perform the old material, which obviously has more of a balance between the singing and the rapping. But and she's very good at doing some of the old school stuff that I remember, In the End or Paper Cut, or what's the other ones for the second album?
Those are the two Linkin Park songs I could name offhand, to be honest.
But they were colossal. They were absolutely everywhere when we were teenagers. You can move without hearing them. But she does the old stuff well, and the new stuff is interesting. I particularly liked from this album Emptiness Machine, which is a kind of advanced single. That's pretty good. Heavy as the Crown is pretty good, and obviously that's picking up, nodding to the fact that she is picking up Chester Bennington's crown. There's a song called Casualty that's quite good. Again, that's one that's much more of a metal song, has less rapping in it, more of a straight up metal song. There's one called IGYEIH, all in capitals, which I think is I Gave You Everything That I Had, which is pretty good. I haven't really been engaged in what Linkin Park have been up to for a long time, but this caught my attention as an interesting new direction to go in, having a woman singer.
To slightly spoil our future direction, I'd be watching the TV show Arcane Season 2, and isn't Heavy as the Crown one of the big soundtrack drops on that?
Yeah.
There's an episode named after that song.
And I'm pretty sure they use it there as well. Arcane has a pretty good soundtrack of contemporary alternative music, lots of, metal influenced and punk influenced tracks. One of the great things about that is the soundtrack. So they're definitely riffing off contemporary music.
Anyway, we'll get to Arcane.
Yes.
Spoilers.
But
the sort of music they have in Arcane is, I guess, sort of the descendants of Linkin Park, I guess. The sort of, heavy emo screaming.
Yeah. I mean, it was incredibly popular. And the other thing is that, it's come around. I feel like, again, that like now this stuff is about 20 years old. It's ripe for a nostalgia, but also kind of nods to it and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of bands today, like, well, yeah, probably my favourite contemporary band, Dead Pony. I think they're lining up a cover of Limp Bizkit's Break Stuff, you know, and they do sort of riffs on Nirvana and Prodigy and things like that live, you know, all music from that period. And I've talked openly about how they're, you know, influenced by the likes of Linkin Park, Limp Bizkit, Wargasm, another, yeah, contemporary alternative band, have had Fred Durst on a track as a guest vocals, things like that. There's a lot of bands that are nodding to this. Mia Asano, who's a electric violin player and musician and composer, has again openly talks about nods to music from this era. And these are all people who are like, you know, in their early 20s, way too young to be into this stuff the first time around. They're all talking about how these contemporary wave of alternative musicians are very influenced by this stuff, in the same way that, like, you know, when we were teenagers, you know, bands like Block Party or, you know, Libertines and things like that were picking up a lot of like 70s references and things like that, you know, and the Strokes and things like that, you know, would borrowed their fashion very much from things like the Band, and, you know, were riffing on that kind of music in the same way that what's about 20 years ago kind of comes round as kind of a bit retro and cool and like sparks a new like evolution. And now it's the time for that kind of new metal inflected alternative music of the early aughts.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Yeah, I gather we are in the middle of 2000s nostalgia, noughties nostalgia, I guess. So maybe it is time for Linkin Park to have another go.
Yeah. And I think the 20-year reissue of Meteora that was last year was very successful. I guess that was a big moment for them because they weren't, I guess, ready to debut their new singer, but obviously wanted to put something out. When everyone posts their Spotify Wrapped at the end of last year, like people like Mia Asano were like posting their top albums was like the reissue of Hybrid Theory and stuff, which very much saying that, like, you know, we're into this stuff. It's come around again. But it's good that Linkin Park they're not just doing, you know, become a legacy act where they just tour the old hits. Because they could have just carried on, I guess, playing live with like recording of Chester Bennington's voice and then, but they've actually decided to evolve, get a new singer, you know, change the sound up a bit and produce new material actually, rather than just resting on their laurels. So I think you have to respect that.
Yeah, no, I do have a certain respect for bands who, have been going a while and continue to put out new material rather than just slapping out the hits. And that's why I'm on the Blur side in Blur versus Oasis.
That is true. I really don't think that this new Oasis tour is really scheduled to produce any new music. I guess we'll see how successful the whole output is, but obviously we'll also see if the tour actually goes ahead or if the brothers will fall out before it happens.
Yes, and of course, also why I like Weezer. Although Weezer have, after a few years where they put out about 6 albums in 2 years, they have slowed down the productivity a little bit, but I suppose the poor boys deserve a break. Yeah,
they do consistently produce new material, and they did those 4 EPs in a year a short while ago, which is, that's a reasonable amount of new material for 1 year.
Reasonable, just acceptable, tolerable. But no, fair enough. Kudos to Linkin Park. I did, when I heard they's now switched to female vocals, I was curious, but I have not yet got around to actually listening to it. I'm glad to hear it works out for them.
Yeah. I'm meaning to look up what Anthony Fantana, the internet's busiest music nerd, thinks of that album. So I'm curious what his take is. But anyway, I want to do my take, uninfluenced by other people's opinions first. But if you're curious about this, and you've got Spotify, I'd recommend giving it a go. It is something a little different. And also while you're there, do check out Dead Sarah. They are ace. They are very, very good. My only hope is that they can continue as a project now that their lead singer is in a bigger and better known band.
That is a problem,
Yeah. Cool. But anyway, I've been engaging in some 2000s era nostalgia. Nick, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, I am only 3 years out of date. I've been reading Monsters, a graphic novel by Barry Windsor-Smith, which I think of as quite new, but of course actually came out in April 2021. This is a book about a young man who submits to military experiments and gets turned into a massive monster, and then inevitably has to go on the run and get chased by the army. And meanwhile, a series of lengthy and incredibly harrowing flashbacks tells us the story of how his life fell apart and he ended up submitting to these experiments. And that's the core of the book, to be honest. The stuff about him becoming a monster is honestly almost basically a framing sequence. It's like a 350-page book, and I would say there's about nearly 100 pages at the beginning and about 50 pages at the end that deal with the bit where he becomes a monster and confronts the army. And then there's 200 pages in the middle where we just really dig into the nitty-gritty of how he was abused as a child. It's very much one of those graphic novels. It's really good. It's obviously also really, really heavy and depressing. Like, as I say, the long sequence in the middle about his childhood is just a really, really miserable, harrowing, beat-by-beat depiction of domestic abuse. It's no fun at all. There's a possibly apocryphal story about this book, because it's been in the works for 35 years. This is a book that's been... Barry Windsor-Smith has been working on this since, I think, the late 80s. There's a rumour that this was meant to be a sort of dark 80s take on the Hulk, where we really, really dig into the childhood abuse that Bruce Banner suffered that was later manifested as him becoming this monster. But for whatever reason, possibly because Marvel didn't want to, or possibly because it took him 35 years to finish it, I don't really know, it has ended up being this independent project. But yeah, it does kind of feel in a way like a bit of a sort of belated holdover from the 80s era of both dark superheroes and indie graphic novels. It's very intense, it's dealing with very raw subjects, it's got this sort of very clear on-the-nose anti-war message. There's some real sort of evil soldiers, and the Nazis are also tangentially involved. Yeah, it's a very, very strange, raw, emotional, as I say, kind of anachronistic, but still very good book. The art is absolutely gorgeous. Like, you can sort of see why it took him 35 years to produce 360 pages of this. It's lovely stuff.
Does the same guy wrote it and drew it?
Yeah, it's a one-man show.
Well, yeah. It does sound really, really good, actually, yeah. I really like things that take, I don't know, a sci-fi or, related concept and, but use it just as like a window dig into a character and, kind of put the sci-fi story kind of in the background. Yeah, there are, like, I guess, a rich history of sci-fi stories, that introduce you to, like, some kind of horrific sci-fi concept with the question hanging on around who would do such a thing. Then the next thing they do is answer the question. Like, what would it take to drive you to this? It makes me think of Dan Simmons' novel Hyperion, which is a brilliant sci-fi novel in which it's kind of a sci-fi take on the Canterbury Tales. A group of characters go on a journey to see this sort of powerful alien being, the Shrike, and all of them will be killed apart from one, who gets granted a wish. And obviously the story is, well, what would motivate you to take on such appalling odds? So yeah, I kind of like that as a concept because, you've got this question as a reader, why do this? Like what sort of person would do it? And some media just sort of breezes past that sort of thing with a simple explanation. But in reality, the explanation would be quite complex and, as you say, probably quite dark.
Yeah, I mean... I don't really know. As I say, I don't know how strictly true this it's a kind of Hulk story thing is. But yeah, the idea that Bruce Banner is an abused child has been part of his backstory for decades at this point, in the comics anyway. I don't think they've ever gone too close to that in some of the films.
The only close thing they got was in the Ang Lee one, I suppose, when...
Oh, his dad, yeah.
Yeah, his dad experimented on him as a child, and it wasn't so much that gamma radiation turned him into the Hulk, it kind of just awoken in him this thing that his dad had like planted in there. But yeah, it doesn't seem like it's like what you were discussing. But even if this wasn't originally conceived as a Hulk project, you can see that it was clearly inspired by Hulk, or like riffing on that, that idea of, there's things about the military in there, there's things about, a person becoming a monster.
Yeah, I mean, the book's called Monsters, and, it's... Not to go too deep, guys. It's pretty clear after reading more than a few pages of the book who the real monsters are. It's not the guy who is the massive monster. Yeah,
that's, again, a well-established sort of sci-fi trope going back to, Frankenstein's monster and, other things and things like that. It's the classic, like, the real monsters are people. Yeah, again, we said that most zombie films or zombie stories also. So, yeah, adopt that kind of line. But I do like the sound of this, as it does sound like, pretty dark, which is, very much my vibe.
It's very dark, as I say. It's not dark in a particularly gratuitous or messy way, but just very long, lingering depictions of the domestic abuse way. I could lend you the book if you want. It's quite a large book, but you're welcome to borrow it.
Yeah. No, sounds good.
But yeah, no, it's good. It was a very acclaimed big graphic novel release back in 2021 when it first came out, and I put it on my Christmas list and then didn't read it for what's now coming up to 3 years. But yeah, this is me maybe clearing out some of the old Christmas books. Well, not clearing out. I'll probably keep it, but, actually reading some of the old Christmas books as the next wave looms onto the horizon.
Yeah, I can see why you wouldn't necessarily dive into this straight away. It's possibly the sort of thing you have to be in the mood for. I've got films and stuff I've been given as Christmas gifts a while ago that are basically, I just need to be in a really, really specific mood to watch a depressing French film about someone who got crippled by an orca.
Yeah, no, I've got a lengthy graphic novel about shooting at Kent State, which, again, I got for Christmas a few years ago and really need to be in the mood for. I'll get to it. Maybe this year.
Yeah, sounds good, though. I mean, sounds good in the sense of like an interesting and artistically fulfilling project. And this does, yeah. And things like that. And I guess there must have been like a fair amount of fanfare when it came out, if it was sort of like 35 years in the making. That builds anticipation, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Barry Windsor-Smith was I think, in the sort of 80s, 90s, a major artist, really known for his beautiful work. He's probably best known, certainly in the field of sort of mainstream superhero comics. He drew a graphic novel called Weapon X, which is the original sort of definitive book about Wolverine's dark origin and being experimented on in the Weapon X project. So again, some crossover there, I guess. So he did that, and then I think, to be honest, I think he may be working on this for quite a long time now. I don't think he's done many major projects in comics for a lot of the last decade or so. Again, you can see why he's so acclaimed. It's a gorgeous book.
Yeah, it's always good when something that's been so long in the making comes out and it is actually, really good, and clearly it's been like a labour of love that's been slowly worked on and not just a sort of, giant artistic folly. I was just thinking of like Francis Ford Coppola's recent film. They obviously, again, 30 years in the making, and a lot of people kind of wished he hadn't bothered.
Yeah, no, I think Monsters does deliver. It delivers in a slightly skew-with way. Like, if you're coming into this to see page after page of a monster fighting a tank, then spoilers, there's not very much of that at all. There's a couple of car chasey bits, and that's about it. But it's delivering in other ways.
It does sound very, very good, yeah. I don't know if this is the sort of thing that will get adapted at any point. Maybe it's just too dark to see, like, a streaming one, but I guess if it's good.
You never know. I don't know. It's one of these things where it's a very sort of literary graphic novel. I think the book is kind of the end in itself. I don't know if it really matters that much, but it could be adapted. Whether there's a huge audience for it, I don't
know. Next up, this episode, we will be discussing Gladiator II, a sequel to the 2000s film Gladiator, both directed by Ridley Scott. 16 years have passed, and now Rome is ruled by the despotic brother emperors Geta and Caracalla, while corruption flourishes. When the son of Maximus, Lucius, now living to the name of Hanno, is taken prisoner, he becomes a gladiator and hopes to one day get revenge against the Roman general who captured him. Meanwhile, a rebellion is stirring at the heart of Rome. We saw this film in the cinema recently. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I had a nice enough time watching this. It whips through its plot pretty quickly. It doesn't feel long, despite being quite long, which I guess is the sign of a good epic. The action sequences are cool. It's entertaining. I felt maybe a step or two removed from it. It probably doesn't help that I think I saw the first film when I was a teenager. I'm pretty sure I did, but I don't really remember it in any detail. Yeah, it's alright. I just didn't feel super invested. I don't remember how concrete the characterization was for the original lead character played by Russell Crowe, but the Paul Mescal guy here, Hanno, or Lucius, just seems like a guy, to be honest, just a bloke. He has a lot of heft, and he does very well in the action sequence, and I was broadly on his side, but I can't say I massively cared. Fortunately, I was able to cling on to the very strong performance from Denzel Washington as the villain, the guy who owns Paul Mescal, who is great. He's clearly having a lovely time. He's really going for the whole thing. If he hadn't been in it, I may well be giving this a worse review. Ultimately, I was entertained. I'm not sure how well it will stand up to reviewer scrutiny, but it's entertaining enough.
Yeah, I thought this film had a lot of good spectacle in it, and I was a bit dubious when they announced the sequel so long after the original. But it is a big screen spectacle. It's the sort of thing that Ridley Scott does very well. This is kind of very much the sort of film that he excels at, making it a good, entertaining film. And to be honest, I preferred this film probably to Napoleon, his last big film. Although that film was trying to do a lot more, where this is really just aiming at just being really entertaining. It's got some good, fight sequences, as you say, and, Denzel Washington is very, very good. I just feel that this film, the obvious thing to say is that it just doesn't have the magic that the first one had. The first one felt very fresh, I guess partly because, historical epics hadn't really been done as a genre for a while, not on this kind of scale. And it did breathe new life into the genre by having a sort of fresh, modern take on it. If it wasn't for the successful Gladiator, we probably wouldn't have had, Lord of the Rings and things like that. It felt new, and also it had Russell Crowe delivering a career-defining performance, that both made his career and sort of defined it, but with his just sort of explosion of sheer raw charisma. It's possibly unfair to evaluate this film against those criteria because, you can't just reinvent a genre that's now popular, by bringing it back. You can't, discover this great talent or elevate to, A heights is great talent. Those sort of things only come once in a blue moon. But one of the crucial things I felt this film was lacking was actually what Joaquin Phoenix brought for the last one, which is, playing a really great villain that kind of, was just great to have, really just being really evil, but also, and scary and kind of really, again, excelling. I mean, the phenomenal cast of Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix in the previous film did make it work. Also, Richard Harris, Oliver Reed, some real heavyweight actors they had in the first one. And yeah, like the villains in this, the brother emperors, they're just not as interesting or as captivating as Phoenix was. So yeah, that's just something they don't have.
I feel like the real villain comparator is Denzel Washington, isn't it? He's the antagonist here.
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean,
yeah,
I guess he's a somewhat sympathetic villain. You do kind of see his points, but he's still ultimately opposed to the hero.
Yeah. And there's also a sort of arc of, at some point you're not sure if they're on the same side. They kind of want the same thing, which is the downfall of the Pedro Pascal general character. And then there's they kind of obviously end up on the other side. There's some good twists and turns that keeps the film exciting and interesting.
Yeah, there are some good moments where it's like, oh, it's not as simple as you thought. Especially, as you say, with the Pedro Pascal general character, who does go through an interesting journey and, seems like one thing, but actually turns out to be kind of another in a way that's quite well done, and Pedro Pascal is as good as he always typically is. Yeah, I don't know, there's something almost, I don't want to say fence-sitting, but there's something quite in the middle about this, in that, yes, maybe the joy of Gladiator was seeing, hard bad hero Russell Crowe versus evil imperial villain Joaquin Phoenix, and this film has something which is both, on some level, more complicated and more ambiguous, but also yet less, I don't know, straightforwardly enjoyable.
Yeah, the plot of this is definitely more complicated.
Yeah.
It's not like massively more complicated, but it is like more complicated. There's more twists and turns and betrayals and stuff. Where the plot of the first one is quite straightforward. Yeah, which again is what makes it interesting, is it is trying to do something different. They're not literally just like trying to repeat the same film just with like a younger cast. They've kind of thought about how this film's going to be different and what will be new about it. And as you say, the Denzel Washington character is doing something different, because in the first film they're either basically on Maximus's side or they're on the Emperor's side. In this one it's a bit more complicated and things like that, but also I guess the simple film just gives kind of space for these like big performances, which is what the first film kind of excelled at.
Yeah, there is a lot more plot here, and there's some entertainment to be had just by watching Denzel Washington mess around. Again, I do feel like, although he does carry the action scenes, I do feel like the lack of something from the Paul Mescal character does harm it a little bit. Like, there's not that much motivation to him beyond, to use a slightly dated, maybe a bit of internet parlance, the fact that they fridge his wife in the opening sequence. Like, it is a very old school motivation for the male character. You deaded my woman.
Yeah.
I guess maybe the fact that this film is a sequel to a 20-year-old film makes that almost seem apt, but it is still a bit basic.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I guess they're going for this sort of very broad Hollywood motivation in that sense of like, yeah, he wants revenge against Pablo Pascal because he not only conquered his city and enslaved him, but yeah, killed his wife and all of that. And yeah, then part of the fun of the film is watching the machinations of Denzel Washington, so how he sets up the big moment that's like on the poster and in the trailer and stuff when the two end up fighting each other in the gladiatorial arena. Something they got a bit different this time is the Pedro Pascal character, in that his allegiance kind of shift. At first he's set up as like, the antagonist, he enslaves the main character, makes him be a gladiator, and there's like, you're building up to this big fight between them because it's in all the promotional material. I don't want to necessarily spoil all the intricacies, but there's a switch in allegiance and things move around, which is, again, this is the things that the film's doing different to the previous ones.
It's a Gladiator film obviously made, in the 2020s when things are less simple than they used to be, and
yeah,
it can't necessarily just be as straightforward. And, as I say, Denzel Washington, who's playing this kind of shifty Iago-like villain, he has a valid point, but he's also, screwing the little guy to achieve his valid point. And there's something a bit more interesting and complex to it. But also, ultimately, it's a Gladiator film, and it wants to be about people chopping other people's heads off.
Yeah, and to be fair, like, that is good. Like, it's entertaining and things like that. Like, I don't think this film is really troubling, like, the top 5 or even probably the top 10 of the year. But yeah, like I say, it is like the sort of violence and action is really good and interesting. There's some epic battles sequences in the film, and like the scenes in the Colosseum are really good. Like, especially like there's a big naval battle.
Yes, that was good.
Yeah, which is something they really did. I think we've only discovered relatively recently that, yeah, they were able to flood the Colosseum, because most of the gladiatorial fights were supposed to be the restaging of, ancient battles from, things like either Roman or Greek history or like, Homeric legends and things like that. And, and the first film has that element as well, that they're supposed to be like restaging battles from like, the Peloponnesian War or something like that. But yeah, we discovered recently that as well as staging land battles, they restaged naval battles, and they could flood the Colosseum and have like boats fighting each other. And I've watched a lot of stuff about ancient Rome, and it's one of those cliches. Again, you see on the internet, like, how often do men think about ancient Rome? Quite a lot, actually. But I've never actually actually seen anything set in ancient Rome that, shows them recreating a naval battle, which is something they did. I guess they needed the budget of a big Hollywood film to do it, but it's not something that even like a premium drama, from Amazon or Now or something like that. We have the budget to do this kind of a really epic thing, but it was amazing to see. And it was also great to see that element of history brought to life.
Yeah, for all of that, I can complain about like the character story not quite landing. Ultimately, the entertainment and the plot and the action spectacle is very much here. As I say, I often complain about long films feeling like they dragged. This film is, I think, slightly longer than Joker 2, and Joker 2 felt like it was a million years long, whereas this whipped by fairly quickly. I didn't really have any problem with it.
Yeah, again, this is what Ridley Scott does so well. I mean, I don't know how old he is. He's probably in his 70s, maybe even 80s, and he still basically can just like churn out popcorn entertainment that's as good as anything he's ever done. I mean, he's got some absolute classics under his belt, Alien, Blade Runner, obviously, even the original Gladiator, it was a sort of era-defining film. But he does just do a great action adventure. I mean, I really like Black Hawk Down. It's not one of the greatest war films of all time, but it is just like a tense roller coaster from start to finish. And, he can do it in, set in contemporary military setting. He can do this set in, ancient times, because he's just got a real action storytelling, mind and eye. That's just his skill set. He's very good at it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good night at the cinema. I'm sure eventually, once it's on streaming or DVD or whatever, it'll be a good film to stick on at Christmas and watch with your dad,
Yeah, exactly.
It is good entertainment. As I say, it may not trouble the awards or the best of lists as much as the previous one did, but I want to also be clear, it's a good rollicking film. I am not questioning its entertainment value.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, achieve the heights of performance or being visually interesting or, elevating the action genre in the way that Dune did, for example, which is also another film primarily about people who fight with knives against each other.
Crucially, yeah.
Yeah, well, it looks good in cinema. That's why there's a lot of this sort of stuff. But it was an entertaining night in the cinema, as you say. And B, I feel, did overcome the skeptics who are basically like, another Gladiator film? Really? And to be honest, the obvious take should have been, it's Ridley Scott. He'll do what he does well. He's cast some cool people, Pedro Pascal, Paul Mescal. They're all interesting people to watch. Denzel Washington. It's one of those things, on paper it looks good, and, on some levels it is good.
Yeah, there's another one, but as we often say, maybe doesn't quite transcend, but it's a decent movie.
I mean, I think one of the reasons why I liked it is, again, because I do have this interest in ancient Rome. But it does, I think, capture ancient Rome quite well, how violent a society it was. It's quite a violent film, and even for something that's only rated 15. But it does really capture how incredibly violent Rome was as a society. People say things like foundation of Western civilization, but just say, extremely violent, extremely corrupted, and, quite sadistic. And it does actually bring all that to the screen. So it does have something to say about ancient Rome. And sort of portrays it accurately. I mean, the actual historical events, it plays super fast and loose with the actual history. I mean, it won't surprise anyone to say that, although, Greta and Cala were real people, they, I think in the film they're twins, but they were brothers in real life, and they only ruled together for about 2 years, and they weren't connected to Marcus Aurelius from the first film and things like that. It won't surprise anyone that this film has played really fast and loose with the history. But it does capture the violent vibe of ancient Rome, which I do like.
Yeah, I personally am not a huge Roman enthusiast, but it's a good setting for an action film.
Finally, this episode, we will be discussing the second season of The Diplomat. At the end of the first season, American ambassador to the UK, Kate Weiler, uncovered a British conspiracy behind an attack on a British warship. When her husband arranged a meeting with an MP involved in the conspiracy, they were caught in a car bombing. This second season picks up where the last left off, with Kate trying to uncover the truth behind the conspiracy, whilst dealing with the machinations of her government and the British government, the interference of her husband, and a plan to make her the Vice President of the United States. We've seen this complete second season on Netflix. Nick, what did you think of it?
Yeah, I like this a lot. I thought the first season kind of established this sort of fun, character-driven, farce/thriller, comedy/drama vibe, which I think the first season did a good job of making us like the characters, and in the second one we got maybe a bit more plot. The opening few episodes especially lean a bit away from the silliness. I guess after the old bombing, they may be obliged to take things a bit more seriously. And we get a few episodes which almost feel a bit more thriller, and then we lean a bit back into the sort of character farce again, and then, it really builds to a glorious climax of both drama and silliness by the end. I thought this was really good, especially the last episode of the season I really, really, really really enjoyed. I thought that was fantastic. Kerry Russell and Rufus Sewell are absolutely great in this. They've got a very good dynamic. They're both great actors. They're excellent at playing these sort of relatable yet annoying characters who you can sort of see in a relationship and understand the dynamic, and it's very compelling. Yeah, no, I enjoy this a lot. It's a good show.
Yeah, I might even go as far to say tight as fuck, which we've described things as in the past. In that, yeah, each episode is compelling drama. It's got great characters. It always drives forwards towards the next thing. What's the next twist, the next big moment they're going to end an episode on to carry you on to the next one. It's always well paced. There's a great ending to the season, which I guess we cannot discuss. But yeah, but the final moments of the final episode are even more dramatic and intense than the car bombing that finished the first season off, which was a pretty surprising, dramatic ending to the first season. But also, 6-episode season. Episode 5 had a really good twist right at the end. Episode 4 also had a really good twist at the end. They paid off all the stuff set off in season 1 with the, again with the car bombing and the conspiracy. So, each time you always get your kind of 50 minutes of just really exciting drama. Yeah, definitely one of the shows of the year.
Yeah, it's very good. It's very rich and involved. I will admit, I've maybe got a bit used to streaming shows where you can sort of half watch them whilst thinking about, I don't know, your shopping list or something, or maybe occasionally glance at your phone. But this is not one of those. This is very much pay attention, or you will suddenly realise you've lost track of what's going on and need to rewind 5 minutes. It's proper good TV.
Yeah, there's a lot of characters and they've each got their own plot threads and things like that, and they kind of weave in and out of the main story of the rise in the career of Kate Weiler. I mean, it really helps they've got a great cast. On the British side, I really like Roy Kinnear as Prime Minister Trowbridge. I think he's very, very good. Yeah, there's also David Gacy, or Gacy I think it's pronounced, as the Foreign Secretary. Is again really, really good charismatic actor. And on the American side, like Ali Ann as the CIA one. I mean, I think special mention must have to go to Rufus Sewell, who is delivering, I think, a career milestone performance. As he's just kind of, so good as a character that's both really likable and dislikable at the same time. Sort of slick operator, charming, charismatic, in some ways quite selfish and dislikable. So, everyone's doing great work here.
Yeah, and Kerry Russell, who, as I believe I said when I mentioned this show before, was extremely good in The Americans, which I watched over the last couple of years. And, yeah, he's very good here in a much less aggressively serious, punishing role. But still, she's very charismatic, and she does a very good job of both playing this character as, I don't know, I think sometimes when you do these dramas about a woman in a position of power, there's a habit of making them look a bit sort of scatty and, I don't know, unprepared for the whole thing. And she does a good job of appearing both intimidated by the job in a very human way, but also clearly very competent in a way that you understand why she's actually got it. And yeah, it's a good part. Also, she's very appealingly relatable and cynical about the whole thing.
Yeah, it does have that sort of, cynical edge to it. I think what they've done quite well with the character is basically having, she is, a expert in behind-the-scenes diplomacy, which is, what she spent her career doing, and she's climbed to the top of that. But she's sort of a fish out of water when it comes to frontline politics with a visual face. She's not used to being the face of America in the UK. She's not used to dealing with leading politicians, like prime ministers who, they don't work behind the scenes. They project power out into the world. So they managed to find someone, or create a character who is both, an expert in their field and competent, and it's always entertaining to watch someone who's competent do their job well. But also they've got that fish out of water thing going on. So they managed to get both kind of together. And also they've got, an American coming to Britain when she's used to working in again, places like Afghanistan or things like that, when she's behind the scenes negotiating with people who are openly the enemies of America. Whereas here she's in Britain, everything's supposed to be cordial, but there's this conspiracy behind the scenes. So that's what creates a lot of the drama and the tension.
Yeah, there are a lot of bits where she's thrown off balance by the fact that people have clearly just lied to her face because, I don't know, they think she'll understand that they're lying, or because it's just a done thing and she just misses it entirely in a way that's kind of understandable but also very funny.
And that's why the dynamic with, her husband, played by Rufus Sewell, works so well, because he's experienced in this world. He knows all these things and things like that. And also he's quite controlling. So he kind of wants to, teach her and show her how it works, because he's done this before. He was an ambassador, to a major country. But also at the same time, does he want to help his wife succeed, or does he want to control her by basically saying, you should do what I say because I know how this works? But also, he's not used to now being the behind-the-scenes guy. He's like, doing the backroom meetings, handling the stuff she can't do because she's the public face of America and the UK. He's like, meeting with conspirators and things like that. That's what leads to him, first of all, getting involved in the car bomb, and then later gaining crucial information, which obviously he then hoards for his own use, but then obviously deploys at strategic moments that suits him, and also makes for very dramatic end of episodes.
Yeah.
I mean, what I'm saying might sound a bit cryptic. It's because I'm dancing around dropping spoilers, because it is worth watching the show if you don't know the twists before they come.
Yeah, no, there are some very good twists, as Alistair said, towards the end of the season, which we will probably try and refrain from spoiling, because although this show is, I think, fairly popular, it's not yet ubiquitous, and I feel like more people should watch it. Happily, Netflix have already renewed it for season 3 in an uncharacteristic moment of generosity. That would have been annoying if they hadn't, to be honest. Like, this is a very good season, but it is setting up a lot of stuff. There's not much that's resolved here. If this show had been cancelled at the end of season 2, we would not have been able to say, well, at least they resolved most of their plot, because they resolved literally nothing. So it was nice of them to renew it before season 2 aired, so we didn't have to worry about that.
I mean, it does feel very much that at least they're going for a sort of 3-part story structure, in that like these are more like, like 3 parts of a novel, say, rather than 3 self-contained stories, in that, the first one doesn't really resolve much. It opens up this conspiracy and then finishes with the big car bombing, which basically it only intensifies the conspiracy. It doesn't explain who's behind what or what's going on. In the second part, details emerge, things are unmasked. I kind of like the fact that they did reveal like who's behind things like the initial attack on the British warship that started this thing like that. They're not just purposely sitting on all the twists just to build suspension longer. They are actually giving the audience, knowledge and information, and, we feel like we're learning and moving up through the layers of this conspiracy. But also, again, there's so much stuff that hasn't been revealed, so much stuff that hasn't been paid off, that, like, it doesn't even feel like this is the end of a second novel in a trilogy. It does feel more like this is the end of, part 2 of a very big, long book that has at least a part 3 still to go before the story can be considered anywhere near resolved.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the announcement came that it was ending with season 3, to be honest, which, I could live with. It seems to be what's happening nowadays. But yeah, as long as that's actually the plan and they actually write to that, then fair enough. Yeah.
I mean, I feel confident they can pay off everything and resolve everything within, say, another 6 episodes because of the amount of stuff they get through in these 6 episodes. So yeah, I'm very excited by that. The showrunner, whose name temporarily escapes me, worked on the West Wing. Yeah, the showrunner Deborah Kahn. Yeah, she worked on the West Wing, I believed, in the sort of post-Sorkin years. And there are some occasional moments which I quite like, again, as a political nerd and a huge West Wing fan, when occasionally the characters sort of lapse into West Wing style dialogue, or sort of a line which you feel could come from the West Wing. It's kind of the same as in Succession when someone says something that's incredibly peep show. But yeah, I quite like that. But all these kind of moments I feel like, well, that's a line Toby would have said or Josh would have said.
I quite like the fact that it has a certain something of the West Wing in that there's this combination of like politics and farce, which the West Wing sometimes did. But also, I don't think it seems like an attempt to do a 2020s West Wing. I think it's a lot more thrillery than the West Wing was, really. I don't think the West Wing was ever quite as concerned with these sort of big picture conspiracies. It was often a lot more interested in like the actual political process. Yeah,
this is more fantastical than the West Wing, in the sense that conspiracies like the one in this show, although maybe some do exist somewhere, but like ones that penetrate the kind of the heart of the British and American government, I feel that like probably don't really exist because they would come out. I mean, maybe I'm just being hopelessly naive, but I don't believe there are this kind of conspiracy. So this is, as you say, more of a thriller. There's car bombings and stuff. I know there's like an assassination attempt in the West Wing and things like that, but this has just got like, as you say, a more thrillery character. It's doing something similar to the West Wing. It's doing the whole, let's go behind the scenes of this big political institution. This time it's like the American diplomatic operation in the UK and the British government, and like, let's go behind the scenes, have a workplace drama, see how people interact, what it's like to work in these places in a way that ER does for hospitals, and lots of other shows are done for law firms or things like that, or the police. But this time it's like a big political institution, so it's got that kind of vibe going on. I think the other thing is, as you mentioned before, is that this show is much more cynical than the West Wing. The West Wing does feel very much like the product of the late 90s, early 2000s, especially even like pre-9/11, sense of confidence and in Western democracy and things like that, sort of shines through the West Wing. Whereas this show is, a show made for the post-2016 world. People are much more concerned about conspiracies and less enamored with their leaders and more interested in the story about how they're wheelie dealers, backstabbers and traitors, and, well, not traitors traitors in the sense of like betraying their country, but like traitors in the sense of betraying each other and backstabbing and wheeling. So yeah, it's a political show for a more cynical age.
Yeah, I don't think it's quite thick of it level cynical, but it's definitely, yeah, as you say, built for the modern world. Especially, I think it uses some of those sort of cynical modern assumptions as part of its drama, like, again, dancing wearily around spoilers, but the British Prime Minister, played by Rory Kinnear, Nicol Trowbridge, is somewhat of an obvious Boris Johnson analogue, and also the American president, who gets a bit less screen time, played by Michael McKean, is a bit of a Joe Biden analogue.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, the point is, yeah, there's a lot of implications that the Nicol Trowbridge, Rory Kinnear, Boris Johnson character is up to no good and doing bad things. And I think the show kind of leans on what you expect from that character because of the analogue to maybe push you in a certain way, and then there are twists about how much he's actually done and what he's actually doing. It's clever. It's well done.
Yeah, plays with your expectations like great drama does, and your natural cynicism. I really like Rory Kinnear in this show. I thought he's always interesting. He's on screen, and I also like that what they did with the character is that you can see the parallels to Boris Johnson, which again is how the show kind of manipulates, especially the British viewers' feelings about the characters. But also Nicol Trowbridge feels like a person in his own right. He doesn't feel like basically this is Boris Johnson just changed close enough that we don't get sued. They've created a character who feels like a person with his own political worldview and sort of factionalism and ways of operating, in that he's maybe a bit more straight down the road, a bit more confident than Boris Johnson. Well, not confident, Boris Johnson's very confident, but a bit more like, I say what I think and I mean what I say, rather than constantly trying to shifting and changing positions and things like that, and sort of obfuscating, which Boris Johnson did very well. He's a sort of more, he's like a plain speaking tough British guy, Trowbridge, but obviously and clearly comes from that kind of posh stock that a lot of prime ministers come from, but he's not oozing poshness the way that Johnson does. He also has this kind of a bit of a sort of man of the people type thing, a bit more like Starmer or Blair had, or Cameron and people like that. It feels very much like they've created rather than saying let's just take something from reality and kind of put a real person in our fictional story, but change it enough so that people can understand their dynamics. Let's think about this character, create a fully three-dimensional political animal, which I feel works much better. And it kind of reminded me again in Succession, when they introduce their authoritarian American president, and they don't just make him basically Trump but slightly different. They kind of come up with this character who's like a real character in their own right, and I feel that's always better when writers do that, because it's more interesting and it makes the world of the show feel like a consistent world rather than just being a world where they've taken bits of reality as a shortcut.
Yeah, and we've also got Alison Janney in another little West Wing crossover playing the Vice President, who turns up in the second half of the season. Which is fun.
Very good.
She's playing maybe a bit against type, or certainly against West Wing type, in that instead of playing the likeable, relatable staff member, she's playing the actual front-end politician, and she's a bit more guarded, a bit more unclear about what her agenda is, which, beyond that, I guess, again, spoilers, but yeah, she's very good in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and very much, again, subverting character she played in the West Wing, as you say. Again, one of those performers who's just whenever they're on screen, your attention's drawn towards her as, one of the biggest stars in the show, especially for people who like political dramas. But also that kind of reflects the fact that she's playing a top flight politician. They have the people who have this charisma that whenever they're in the room, your attention's drawn towards them. That's what you need to succeed in the world of politics. It's done very well in that sense, using star power and using the character to convey this person, so they feel like a three-dimensional politician. It's obviously great, just as West Wing fans, to see a West Wing performer crop up.
Yeah, and again, the Kerry Russell character's reaction to this Alison Janney Vice President is quite fun. As someone who maybe clearly isn't used to being around the big political stars, it's quite interesting seeing the way their relationship develops, and I guess, mild spoiler, will clearly continue to develop in season 3.
Yeah, there's a great dynamic between the two of them. They sort of show kind of different ways, I think, to be kind of a professional woman politician, but it's not explored in a big way. The show is more interested in the politics and the conspiracy, but it does have something to subtly say about what it means to be a woman in politics, and presents kind of almost two different ways of doing that through the two main characters, or these two top politicians, the Alison Janney character and the Kate Wheeler character. But this kind of intentional different ways of, again, of being a professional woman politician then kind of feeds into the interpersonal conflict between the two characters. Sometimes they're friends and then sometimes they're opposed as things switch around in the political machinations. Kind of these big ideas in the background are like coming through in character drama, which again is a sign of really good writing.
Yeah, and it all builds very well to a head in the final episode, which again is extremely good. Possibly one of my favourite TV episodes I've watched this year. Again, as I often say at this point in the review, spoilers, this may come up in the old top 5.
I mean, yeah, the finale was so good, as in like the last like 30 seconds was so good that as soon as the twist dropped, we were like, what? We have to go back and watch that again. And just like reround the show and then rewatch the last 2 minutes through again, just to be like, wait, just want to follow the intricacies of this again. Again, I'm going to talk in a fairly cryptic way about this because watch the show and don't have this spoiled for you. But yeah, it's not often that like a big, reveal drops right at the end. I'm like, whoa, got to see that again. That was something, yeah.
As I sort of said before about the Boris Johnson thing, I think there was a certain amount of good misdirection about, I think I definitely expected it to be one thing and then it was another thing I did not think of at all. Fair enough. Well played, show.
Yeah, I was anticipating a big twist because the first season has a big twist at the end when it suddenly massively ramps up the tension with a car bombing right in the final moments. I thought, well, they've got to do that again. It's something like the show's signature. And they dropped great twists at the end of episode 4 and 5. So like, okay, I'm sure they're intelligent enough they haven't blown all their good cliffhanger material before the final episode of the season. But when you're expecting a twist, you're then kind of hunting for it. And I did think, like, is this going to... I think I know what's going to happen. I think I've worked out what the twist's going to be. And then when it actually came, it really caught me by surprise. So again, it's good writing if when you're trying to spot a twist, but they actually still manage to catch you off guard.
Yeah, no, good TV. Strong recommendation. Okay, and that was Moderate Fantasy Violence. Thank you very much for listening. If you have enjoyed this podcast, why not go to our website and look at all our other content, such as our various articles, end of year lists. We're getting dangerously close to the next end of year list, so yep, get ready for that. And if you've enjoyed this whole process, then why not go to your podcast application of choice and leave us a nice 5-star review. Thank you very much.
You can also get more of us on social media. You can find us on Facebook by searching for Moderate Fantasy Violence, or on Twitter and Blue Sky, where we are at MFV Podcast. Probably most active on Blue Sky, as that's the way things seem to be going. You can also get more from me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or Blue Sky by searching for Alistair Ball. Find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com, or you can find my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com.
And you can find me as Nick Bryan. Again, Blue Sky seems to be the way my text-based social media is going. I'm also trying to keep up the Instagram account, and you can find some sort of summary of my comics making practice at nickbryan.com. And you could also come back in 2 weeks for our air quotes Christmas special of Moderate Fantasy Violence, in which we'll be covering the next season of internet beloved animated series Arcane and new Apple TV war movie Blitz. See you in 2 weeks for that. Bye-bye.
Bye.